Hello, physical science students. Welcome back. In our last video lesson, we started talking about the way that scientists answer questions. And I told you that there would be a second part to that lesson. And so today is that second part. So one of the ways that scientists answer questions is through the scientific method. And so in the last lesson, we walked through the steps of the scientific method. Today, we're going to focus on another method or framework for answering questions called the CER method. And a lot of times in science class, I'll remind you to write like a scientist. So I'll ask a question or I'll ask you to give me your feedback on something, and then I'll say write like a scientist. And what I mean by write like a scientist is I want you to follow the CER framework. So what is the CER framework? Basically, it's just another way that we can answer questions. So there's not as many steps as the scientific method, and it's a little different than the scientific method, but it can still serve as that framework for making explanations in the science classroom. So what does CER stand for? The C stands for claim, the E stands for evidence, and then the R stands for reasoning. So I'm going to give you a second or two and you can pause the video if you need to get this in your notes, what CER method is, what it does, and then the part that says it means to write like a scientist. All right, so the CER process starts with a question, very similar to the scientific method, because remember, it also starts with a question, something that you want to solve or problem that you want to solve. So I've given you an example here. How does water behave in space? And there's a lot of different angles we can take to this question, but if you had me in class, I would show this YouTube video. And if you're interested so that you understand sort of my examples from here on out, if you want to pause the video and go to YouTube and type in, think about it, what happens to water in a vacuum? So go to YouTube, type in, think about it, what happens to water in a vacuum? It's a short little video clip that shows an experiment of what actually happens to water when you take it to outer space. So pause the video now, check out that video. All right, so if you've watched that video, you know what happens to water in outer space. It shows you in the video, it provides evidence and reasoning behind that phenomena. So if I were using the original question, let me go back. If I were using this question to try to create a CER framework answer for this question, I, of course, start with the question, how does water behave in space? And the next step is to research or experiment. Now, I did research by going to the internet, going to YouTube. I found an experiment that another scientist did, and I'm just using their data, which is acceptable as long as it's from a reputable source. If you can't research and find the answer, at this point, you would set up your own experiment to see if you could find the answer. Either way, you're trying to collect data so that you can put that in the next part of the CER framework. So make sure when you're researching and or experimenting that data is collected, because you're going to need that. Now, after you've done your research on your question, you're ready for the first part of the CER framework, which is to state a claim. So a claim is just simply a one-sentence statement, no more. A one-sentence statement has to be a complete sentence that answers the question. Do keep in mind it cannot start with yes or no, and its purpose is that it should describe the relationship between the independent and dependent variable in the experiment. So here's an example from my original question, how does water behave in space? Well, after watching the experiment, I can state a claim. Water in space will boil and then freeze. Okay, so it's simple, to the point, not a lot of frou-frou, complete sentence, one sentence, doesn't start with yes or no. Now, next we're going to want to move on to the E in the CER method, which is to support your claim with evidence. So you've got to have evidence that supports what you just said. So the evidence is simply the data that supports your claim. It can be an observation, what you saw. It can be a graph, a chart, a table. So it doesn't necessarily have to be a complete sentence. A lot of times when we're using the CER method for the E part, the evidence part, people will simply put a graph or a chart or a table. And then they will highlight that graph, chart, table in the reasoning portion. Now, in this section, you're going to want to use multiple pieces of data in your evidence statement, and you're going to want to use enough evidence to actually support your claim. So people who read your evidence statement need to, or look at your graph or chart or table, need to understand why you stated your claim from that. Be sure to leave out extraneous evidence. You don't want to make it too lengthy. So if you've watched the video, this example makes sense. So remember, we want to know, how does water behave in space? I stated my claim. Water is going to boil and then freeze. And so for my evidence, I refer to the video. I seen in the video, and I probably should have been more specific so that my reader could know what video. So I would have said, as seen in the YouTube video, think about it. What happens to water in a vacuum? Water begins to boil when placed in a vacuum and freezes shortly thereafter. So I'm simply just stating what happens when somebody else does the experiment. Now, the last part of the CER framework is to provide reasoning that shows how or why your data counts as evidence to support the claim. So reasoning is going to be that connection between the evidence and the claim that you're trying to make. It's justification for why the evidence is important to the claim. And it must include one or more scientific principles that are important to the claim and the evidence. So it's going to be a little more lengthy. You're actually providing reasoning. So what's the science behind this? So if you look at my example, would say for my reasoning, water when placed in a vacuum like outer space, it will begin to boil due to the decrease in pressure. Once the liquid water turns into the gas phase, the energy in the form of heat moves out of the water, causing the water to freeze. That is coming from the scientist in the video. So I simply took what somebody else has already found and put it in as my reasoning. Here's an example from Science Lessons That Rock, a really good example of the CER method. So if you look, there's a question: does a person's height change throughout the day? And this person stated their claim. They say a person's height decreases throughout the day as gravity pulls down on their body. And then they go further to provide a data table. So they're actually providing the evidence, the results from this experiment when it was conducted. And then they also provide an interpretation for the reader, which is perfect. So we can see from the graph and the interpretation that height does in fact decrease throughout the day. And then they're going on with their reasoning to talk about the reasoning for that is because of gravity, and they just highlight upon what their data table shows. So again, reasoning should bridge claim and evidence. It should highlight why you said what you said and support it with evidence. Now, what I want you to do in the next part, and this is on your notes, so I want you to practice forming your own CER with a really fun video. So this video that I'm going to send you to watch is on YouTube. You'll go to YouTube and you will search for the video, "My Dad is an Alien." So in the search bar on YouTube, you'll type in "My Dad is an Alien." It is a commercial, a car commercial, where a girl believes that her dad's an alien, and she provides lots of evidence that supports her claim. And your job is to, in your notes, answer the question, is her dad really an alien? So if you want to pause the video and use this direct link that's on the screen, you can, Or you could just go to YouTube and type in "my dad is an alien." The video comes up multiple times, but it's a really cute video, and it's great for practicing the CER framework. So the question is the girl's dad an alien? Take a look at that video and then create the claim, evidence, and reasoning for that.